Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome back to the Gray Area with your host, It's That Kid Greg. Now, with college semesters starting all around the country, there is a topic that pops up seemingly every year around this time that I finally feel it is time for me to cover on this channel. For this video, we're discussing rape. I'm gonna get crucified for this! So starting off as we usually do, we're going to go to the definition. Now for this topic in particular, there are a lot of definitions that can be used, seeing how it is a crime that varies based on area, location, jurisdiction, etc., etc. So we're going to go on the basic definition that most people think of when they think of this topic, that is rape. I'm going to be saying this word so many times in this video, I might be put on a list after this. So what is rape? Rape is when a person is forced, coerced, or threatened into participating in a sexual act including anal, oral, and vaginal sex. It's to note that it is also considered rape if somebody is mentally or physically unable to give their consent. This inability to give consent also carries over if the person has been incapacitated some kind, either through alcohol in some jurisdictions and drugs. We're gonna get back to that later, but the definition is pretty straightforward. Most people have a basic understanding of what happens when one person rapes another person. They are forcing them to have sex of some kind. And that is terrible and wrong, and it's how do you even do that? Like, what is wrong with you? Legally speaking, there are a couple different definitions. And for example, let us look at the word statutory rape. This is when an adult has sexual relations with a minor, even if the minor was willing and actively participated in the sexual intercourse. It is still called a rape because legally speaking, that minor is not of age to give consent. So therefore, they did not give consent. But that's legal jargon, and we will also jump into that much later on. In statistics, the same definitions pretty much apply, covering the spectrum of oral, anal, and vaginal intercourse. Being forced through either emotional, mental manipulation, or through the use of drugs, or through the use of physical violence, which is what most of us picture when we hear the word rape, which is, again, how. But one thing that I noticed in particular is with the CDC's reporting on rape and the definitions that it uses, and particularly its point on mental and emotional manipulation, as well as the act of a woman forcing herself onto a man by forcing her vagina around his penis. And for whatever reason, these things are not considered rape, but we're going to, again, get back to that later. So since this video was inspired by college starting back up, let's look at the biggest thing that is stated when college starts back up. That 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 women will be raped on a college campus at some point. I'm going to say this outright, that this is false. It is an entirely misleading statistic, and for whatever reason it keeps getting parroted back and forth amongst these special interest groups and politicians who just want to virtue signal. Now, the misleading statistic comes from a 2007 study by the National Institute of Justice. The survey only represented about 5,500 women across 2 college campuses in the country. It was a 15-minute web survey, and while it did include men originally, the Justice Institute decided to leave them out for whatever reason, when reporting the 1 in 5 statistic, which only applies to women on college campuses. It does not apply to people on college campuses. In addition, the survey's methodology was severely lacking. The fact that it was online made it so that the amount of people who actually responded to the survey was much less than the amount of people that would have responded had it been a live interview situation. In addition, the way that the questions were worded were quite vague and open to interpretation, which may have made the results be much more inflated than what the people actually experienced. But I have a link to the full study in the description below. I implore you guys to check it out and see what you think yourselves. So coming off of that point, what are the real statistics for women and girls getting raped? Well, the fact is it's hard to say. The intimate nature of the crime and how the legal proceedings usually go around it, the fact that victims usually don't report it until it's much too late to actually verify DNA and such, makes it a, well, unfortunate legal gray area. It's even more difficult considering the fact that the majority of victims are victimized by people that they know, like acquaintances, friends, family, people that they're in relationships with, and this makes it extremely difficult for them to want to come forward or for prosecutors to be able to properly figure out what's going on. But I do have some ideas on how to minimize risk, and I do want to stress that I am not trying to victim blame here. All too often, I see people who try to give help and opinions on girls on how to keep themselves safe, and they are oftentimes called victim blamers when really they just want to see less of these crimes take place. So I am about to give my 2 cents. Please don't hurt me. The first point I want to make is personal responsibility. I feel like taking personal responsibility is the biggest way to prevent any bad things and wrongdoings from happening to you. I personally have always lived under the phrase of better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it, which can basically be summed up as better to be overprepared than underprepared. So when I hear people complaining about how they shouldn't have to learn martial arts to protect themselves on the off chance that somebody tries to jump them in the alley, my whole thought is, what harm does it do to have it just in case? But that was just a personal point. I have written points that I think are much more important and that should be addressed much more tactfully. Number 1, alcohol and sex. Be careful where and who you drink with. Seems pretty simple to me. When I was getting into the age of going out to parties and friends' places, the one thing my mother always told me was to never leave my drink unattended, even at a friend's house, because you just don't know what someone might put into it or do to it while you're away from it. She always says to finish your drink before you leave the table or to abandon it once you come back, because you just don't know. In addition, understand that your judgment becomes impaired while you're drinking. Just because you feel like you want to go out and have fun and have a bunch of drinks and live it up, it doesn't mean that you can't be responsible at the same time. When you're drunk, you make a lot of dumb decisions that you wish you didn't do. You think a lot of thoughts that you would never think. Your inhibition is lifted off of you. Think to every time where you were drunk and you decided to text that one person that you really shouldn't text, but you were drunk so you missed them and you text them anyway, and ended up being a huge shit show the next day. But on the scale of your personal safety. And remember that if you do drink too much, you can black out and you can lose your memory and you can forget what happened the night before, which puts you at great risk. I'm not saying that every person at the bar is just waiting around the corner for you to drink just that one drink that throws you over the edge. I don't think most people are like that, but the risk is still there. So be aware of your limits and be aware of when it's time to stop getting drinks and just have fun, or maybe go home. Number 2, discouraging false accusations. Another thing I feel is important is to never report false accusations of rape, and never support somebody that you have found out or know is lying about it. I'm sure we all remember the "I stand with Jackie" hashtag from when the Rolling Stones posted a story about a UVA student under the pseudonym of Jackie being gang raped by several other students. And it was found out to be completely false. However, this hashtag popped up after with people showing their support despite the fact that her story was verifiably false and did not happen. False accusations like this are very problematic, and the real people who suffer because of it are the victims, the real victims. There's already an underlying perception that a small percentage, well, not really small, more like 25% of people who come up with rape accusations are actually lying. And thinking about high-profile cases like the UVA one, where it turned out that the person was lying, makes this perpetuation of people not being believed continue even more when they could be the ones who very well need help, who need people to believe their story so that they can get the support necessary to take down these criminals and receive some sort of justice. And let's not forget about the accused. Rape cases are notorious for tearing down a person's reputation and pretty much ruining their lives. This goes double if the person actually gets convicted, even if they never committed a crime. Just the implications of being charged with sexual assault or rape can seriously mess with someone's head and damage them mentally. Take the case of a 17-year-old boy from last year named Jay Cheshire. After being falsely accused, Jay was found hanging from a tree in his local park 2 weeks after the accuser withdrew her story. It's a tragic situation where he simply could not take the stress of being called a rapist, despite believing himself innocent. And it's not just Jay. Many people have their lives torn apart by false accusations. Sometimes they're even sent to jail and have to spend the rest of their lives in jail because of a false accusation and because of the difficulty of proving these kind of crimes, or rather disproving a false accusation. Because at a certain point, it simply becomes a matter of he said versus she said, or he said versus he said, or she said versus he said, or she said versus she said. It goes all around. This is why activist groups such as men's rights activists have begun creating support groups and actively lobbying for changes in the law in order to protect the accused in these types of cases. Because if it does turn out to be false, in the small percentage of times where it is found to be false, it can severely ruin that person's life despite the fact that they are in fact innocent. Lastly, I want to stress the absolute importance of reporting to the authorities. If you are assaulted, please do not go to social media. Please do not bring your story to a stupid newspaper that will not verify your claims and post it all over the country. Go to the authorities. Go to a police department. Go to a hospital. There are so many resources available to you if you are attacked. And those people who will actually be able to get justice for you and to get help for you. Rape kits that test DNA and other such things are only good for a small window of time after the crime is actually committed. And if you find that you can't make that call or you can't make that trip, have a trusted friend or family member take you to the hospital or make that call for you. And hopefully, if the trend becomes something akin to people actually going to the authorities and telling their stories when it happens and aren't afraid to not be believed, we can actually catch these people who commit these horrible crimes and get more of them off the streets. But most of what I just said in that last point about there being hundreds upon hundreds of resources for you kind of mostly apply to females. A lot of the times, male victims get overshadowed by their female counterparts due to the cultural perception that females are delicate and weaker and that this crime can't possibly happen to men. In fact, while I was researching this, one of the top search results on Google was, "Can men be raped?" You can look it up for yourself, but it was severely troubling to me that people even had to ask that question. Especially considering the fact that men being raped is almost, if not exactly as pervasive as females being raped. Prison rape is a huge problem for male victims, and it is one of the most well-known acts of sexual violence, culturally speaking, and yet it is the least, acted upon. It's the least for people to actually go out and try to do something about it. An ABC article that I will link down below, along with all the rest of my sources, outlines how police officials and prison officials don't even care when it happens, when it's reported. And it's usually used as a form of torture or intimidation towards weaker, smaller, or newer inmates. Dominating them sexually means that they can't rise against you. And in addition, it's joked about all over popular media.
What do you say?
I don't know.
Oh, come on. I'll even cripple that guy who rapes you in the shower.
But I like that guy.
Too late. Oh, my legs!
Two things never happened again after that. Boggs never walked again, and Andy's farts never made a sound again.
Sir, when a new inmate comes in and he wants some drugs, how do you initiate him? The guy goes, "Well, the first thing I do is make him toss my salad." The guy's like, "Toss my salad? Well, what's that?" Guy, "Well, having your salad tossed means having your asshole eaten out with jelly or syrup. I prefer syrup." We don't need a death penalty. We got the toss salad man.
Show of hands, how many people ever raped a man?
Pause.
Uh-huh. How many people ever been raped by a man?
Pause again.
All of them, 100%. You can't get no higher than that, knuckle. You step in here, you get raped. Right up the motherfucking brown eye, baby.
But the problem is not just in jail. Victims outside of the jail who are men, well, they have a hard time just being taken seriously. In Britain, it was reported that about a third of sexual assault victims were male. And while we can't know for certain if that number is 100% accurate due to the nature of the crime and the fact that it is so underreported, but it does pain my heart that a female CDC researcher would make such comments like, a man being drugged and forced to penetrate a woman she wouldn't call it rape, she would just call it unwanted contact. And don't just take that from me. There is a link down below to a SoundCloud of this researcher speaking and talking and saying these words. So you can listen to it from her, you don't have to take my word for it. And speaking of that CDC study, why is it that female on male vaginal rape is not considered rape? Why is it given a separate category called made to penetrate, as if it's something totally and utterly different from being raped? In that same CDC study, it was found that men reported being made to penetrate at almost the same rates that women reported being raped, clocking in about 1.1% for both sexes. But to be fair, the CDC was most likely going off of the United States' legal definition of what constitutes a rape, which I will read for you verbatim because it's important. Penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. Notice how this definition completely disregards the notion that a female can incapacitate a male and force herself upon him. And to give you some perspective, this is the updated definition from 2013, January. Before this, it was much more focused on females because obviously cultural norms have shifted over time, but this is supposed to be the more inclusive law? This is supposed to be the more inclusive legal definition? Seems pretty exclusive to me. So what are my final thoughts? Well, rape is a terrible, terrible crime, and because of its intimate nature and how hard it is to find proof and evidence of these things, it is severely difficult for us to try and combat it without creating some type of witch hunt. But I do have some ideas on how we can make things better. For starters, we need to change the legal definition to include men who have been forced upon by women. This seems illogical to me that it hasn't been fixed yet. Second, we need some type of accountability for false accusers. They should be able to be prosecuted after the fact, or maybe something to let people know that it is not okay to lie about such an awful crime, because it is taking away resources that could be going towards people who have been real victims. I also feel like there should be some type of anonymity clause when dealing with rape cases, not only to protect the accuser, but to protect the accused. On the off chance that the accusation was false, it would be terrible for this person to have their life completely ruined by the whole situation. And in fact, I think it's silly that we plaster these people all over the news like a freak show anyway. It's disgusting, and they should be able to deal with these horrible crimes in dignity and keep their dignity once it's all through, and not be paraded around like some type of zoo animal on a parade. And lastly, when encouraging victims to speak up, we should stress how important it is to go to the authorities with these reports. The authorities need to know what's going on within a window of time if they want to make the best action to get justice for you. And while you think your case may be small and insignificant in the long run, think about it this way. If you've been assaulted and you go to the authorities directly and they are able to catch this person, that's one less person on the streets committing these crimes. And that's how many people who are now saved from going through the same suffering that you might have gone through. But that's just what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. I'd like to thank you for watching. I implore you guys to follow me on Twitter for the latest updates. And remember, nothing is black and white.